If you were given the task to design a perfect person, what attributes would you give them? Before answering the question, you will need to have an idea of what being perfect means to you. Does perfection mean that the person is without fault? Or are they able to overcome every single obstacle in their way? According to the Oxford Dictionary, perfection is the condition, state, or quality of being free or as free as possible from all flaws or defects. But that leads to what counts as a flaw or defect in terms of a person. Does it pertain to appearance, ability, cognition, skill? With how diverse of a species we are and the nature of specialization realized by our society today, it is nigh impossible to use these subjective parameters to coin our definition of a perfect person. As the saying goes, if you judge a fish by its ability to climb a tree, it will live its whole life believing that it is stupid. As such, it's more suitable to select attributes that are non-tangible, unlike those previously mentioned. For instance, emotions. There are 7 facial expressions that give clues to a person's emotions. However, we are trying to define a perfect person. Is the perfect person always happy? Like many of you, I would say no. Maybe a perfect person is capable of feeling all these emotions, but having emotions does not offer more to coining what a perfect person is, more so than just saying that a perfect person has a beating heart. Since emotions itself is too general of a parameter, we cannot use it to coin what a perfect person is. Between the issues of subjectivity and being too generic, it is quite a difficult task to answer the question, what makes a perfect person? And this is where we dive into the fictional character, Furina. Furina makes her first appearance in the region of Fontaine, their nation of justice. Despite being the leader of the nation, she conducts herself very whimsically and often excessively prideful. She has a demeanor closer to a celebrity than a figure of authority, delegating almost all responsibility to the Chief of Justice, Nouvelet, all the while being almost too merry herself. In a series of events, we find out that there is a deeper truth to Furina's character. While she is indeed 500 years old, she has done so not as a Hydro Archon, but rather as a human. When the previous Hydro Archon, Egeria, passed on, she left the best inheritance gift: a doomsday clock. As it turns out, Egeria had created the people of Fontaine using her Oceanid's familiars, and this angered the higher beings in Celestia above. Thus, they were cursed with the prophecy to be submerged by the primordial sea and return to the waters, bringing an end to Fontaine. When Fossalor, the current Hydro Archon, took over, she formulated the ultimate plan to save the nation. She must accumulate enough of her divine power while avoiding the eyes of Celestia above. Thus, she separated her divinity and stored it in the opera courtroom, where people's faith and excitement would fuel her power. What's left of her body becomes Furina, who is now a human vessel tasked to pretend to be the Hydro Archon for the people of Fontaine.
Play as a god?
Initially, Furina tried to introduce herself to the Fontainians by being earnest and kind, yet this was met with public scorn due to their own preconceived notion of how a god should be. Despite deep down having a meek and gentle-minded personality, she must continuously put on a facade of bombastic and dramatic persona. She cannot confide to anyone since the heavens would catch wind of it. She had to do this for the sake of her people, for the sake of Fontaine. Avoiding paperwork aside, she rigorously learns her people's names and situations in order to know the right things to say, since being their god should be natural, right? On the side, she investigates methods to prevent the prophecy from coming to pass, as if she found a method, she would be sooner relieved of her duties as an actress working non-stop. Unbeknownst to Furina herself, this acting contract will last 500 years.
So interminable. So lonely. Just how much longer?
As her divine counterpart Fossilor describes, Furina is the perfect human she had envisioned. Side note, I relegated the usage of the term perfect human until only now to avoid putting it in the title and inadvertently spoiling people who would like to experience firsthand what is, in my opinion, the best Archon quest in the game so far. Anyway, now that we have a working example of what constitutes a perfect human as envisioned by a divine being, we can revisit our original question. What attributes would a perfect human have? Instead of grasping for ideas, we can now work backwards and look at the attributes Furina has, and now generalize them to terms we can make sense of. And if we can make sense of them, then why can't we also strive to become the perfect human? This is quite the grandiose claim, not unlike one Furina herself might make. Yet please allow me to offer the following attributes I find in Furina as my answer.
My dear people, whether you acknowledge me or not, whether you trust me or nay, I say to you, keep faith in your ardor for justice.
When you see someone in distress, feeling sorry for them may give you the virtue of being sympathetic. Empathy, on the other hand, is the ability to comprehend their feelings as if you were in their shoes. Being the greatest actress in all of Fontaine, perhaps in even all of Tevat, Furina immerses herself in the daring role of a god. In order to do so, she must get in the inner psyche of the people of Fontaine if she were to live up to their expectations of what a god is like. Like Fossilor said, Furina's challenge is not trying to become a god, but rather to convince her audience, the people. Hence, a necessary skill she has is to be able to read people's attitudes and adapt to them. After all, if she were to carry on the same characteristics without heeding to people's reactions, she would be busted as an imposter quite promptly. Due to honing her ability to perceive and understand others' feelings for half a millennia, I hypothesize that she has a lot of mirror neurons. Mirror neurons are neurons that fire to match actions performed by others. According to research, mirror neurons form the biological basis for empathy and compassion. They serve a vital role in development when one is learning from a more knowledgeable other, such as speech, movement, and play. Similarly, we see Furina constantly observing her audience's reaction wherever she goes, taking note of what and why are there such reactions. Mirror neurons help the processing and integration of such information, and the more one has, the better one becomes at predicting what actions to follow. This makes her an incredible actress. She is able to perceive what others feel and act accordingly to sustain the never-ending masquerade.
Oh, very good, my people. Only ones such as you are deserving of my rule.
Yet, upon hearing news of the disaster that struck and cost the lives of many Fontainians, she became greatly distraught while being unable to do anything. She still cannot show weakness, so she silently bears the sadness alone as she has been for the 500 years. To be human is to feel, so in extension, being able to feel outside of oneself must be extraordinarily human. Now that Furina no longer has to play the role of the god, she can finally openly share the feelings that others express. It is a human desire to be curious. After all, it is innately a behavior for us to learn throughout the stages of development and even into adulthood. However, the subject and the degree of such curiosity depend on the individual and the context. To what context, then, is the perfect human's curiosity? When Furina was born, she was left with the knowledge of Fontaine's prophecy by Focalors. However, she is clueless about the plan, the duration, or any knowledge about the world a god may have. This was intended by Focalors in order to ensure Furina gets driven to the breaking point and ultimately be accused by her very people. But at the same time, doing so would give Furina the freedom to feel all sorts of emotions and see the world through the perspective of a human, albeit needing to do so without breaking her character as a god. As such, we witness very little of her actions showing her open curiosity on screen. A probable scene we can draw inference from is her rambles in the opera Epiclé. With her role as the Archon in mind, she can't just go around and enjoy new things as other people do. It is analogous to pretending to be the top professor at the most prestigious academy. If you appear curious about a simple concept, people will begin to question the validity of your position. Hence, one of the only appropriate mediums to satisfy her curiosity in her position is in the opera Epiclé, a courtroom of spectacles. In her profile, it said that most of her questions during a trial are born from her curiosity. This may be one of the only instances where her meek and curious inner self can surface without her status as a god being called into question. Diving into the dialogues as we level up our friendship unveils her naturally curious personality. She easily feels interested in all kinds of things, such as secretly loving little animals due to their inconsistent and unpredictable nature. It seems like her curiosity knows no bounds. Even as restricted as she was, playing one of the riskiest roles in the history of acting, she set out to find ways to satisfy her inquisitive mind. Perhaps like her never-ending performance, a perfect human's desire to learn new things is limitless. You may be familiar with the ethical dilemma that asks you to choose between saving either the majority or the minority. Can you be certain about your decision without hesitating? How well can you justify your choice? When Focalors gave Furina the task of suffering for the sake of Fontaine, Furina quickly understood that her pain would weigh less than all of the people's lives combined. This is quite interesting to me, since Furina was just introduced to this world without much knowledge other than the prophecy. Yet, she was certain about her answer to the dilemma, introducing self-sacrifice for the greater good. As Lawrence Kohlberg outlined in the famous Heinz dilemma, people can morally develop to grasp higher stages of social reasoning. Kohlberg suggests that these stages are a progression. We all start from pre-conventional morality with egotism and then progress to varying degrees as our thinking matures. The appraisal of whether a choice in a moral dilemma is right or wrong is not the focus. Rather, it is the reasoning that shows progression in the ability to think about the world in a nuanced way. Thus, not everyone is able to reach the higher stages of moral reasoning, which involves the consideration of abstract concepts such as universal human ethics. Let's bring back to Furina. She initially wondered why she was the one chosen to bear the suffering, but then she resolved the dilemma without much second thought and recognizes that saving the majority is of greater importance to her individual wishes. This response would classify as a post-conventional way of moral reasoning by her consideration for the universal human ethical principles, specifically justice. The stages of moral development help guide one away from blind egotism towards intricate considerations for abstract principles beyond law. There is no right or wrong choice when resolving a dilemma, just that having a more comprehensive standard may enable a kinder and safer society. What comes off as natural to Furina may be hard to achieve, but surely it is not an impossible feat. If a human flaw is selfishness, then being free from that flaw is being considerate of others and different perspectives. You may have heard of the story of Sisyphus, whom Zeus cursed to roll a boulder up a hill for eternity. To undergo the same monotonous task places a burden not just on the physical body, but also mentally. However, some surmise that Sisyphus embodies the indomitable human spirit, expressing the sheer human will to stand against the indifference of the universe. It is the strength and courage that one possesses to get up each day in hopes of success that comes in the long term. This is Furina. As the story trailer said, the Hydro Archon lives for the spectacle of the courtroom. Now, we know that this statement has a double meaning. In the first interpretation, one may say she finds enjoyment in people's ups and downs during the trials, much like how medieval royalty may find amusement in common folks' suffering. In the second interpretation, we evaluate the choice of words in a different sense, using newfound information about Furina's backstory. Furina is not the Hydro Archon, but a mere human pretender. The Hydro Archon, Focalors, resides in the opera epiclé itself as the Oratrice Mécanique d'Analyse Cardinale, or more simply, the robot judge with the final say in the trial. So long as the Hydro Archon is still alive, the show must go on. And while the show is on, Furina is to continue her act for her people, laughing when she should be glad, crying when she should be sad. I am unable to give justice to the sheer emotions delivered by the revelation of her backstory. We see her curious childlike innocence quickly being subjected to the trial by the judgment of her people. Quoting her character story for, "If she could endure until the danger has passed, she could finally take off her mask and regain the freedom to express her feelings." We see that she had no one to confide the secret to, like having a solitary backstage behind the infinite spiral of blinding spotlight. George Robert Mead discusses the concepts of the self being two parts, the I and the me. The I represents the individual identity and personal wishes, while the me represents the self learned from social expectations and environmental contexts. The me regulates the I to ensure we don't break the law of the community, similar to Freud's ego censorship. In other words, who do I want to be from what others think of me?
You must begin a never-ending masquerade. You must never let anyone suspect your identity.
As for Furina, the I becomes utterly repressed by the me. Bridled by innumerous expectations from the people of Fontaine, she is left without much room to explore her personal identity. One must imagine the pain of ego death, slowly losing herself in a span of 500 years. As written in the character story 4, Furina's performance at the Hydro Archon has been flawless. Her painstaking perseverance produced the perfect product. But even with such incredible perseverance, she begins to crumble as her perseverance comes in conflict with the other traits that make her human. That is, the sense of self that includes all the prior traits discussed. In the end, the perfect human falls into despair. With the cry of the gull that signals the spark of hope, Fontaine is saved via Focalors' sacrifice. With that comes Furina's freedom, and the final catharsis in Les Miserables. I wish nothing but happiness for Furina, as she has essentially borne far more than a mortal could take both mentally and physically. Though she still at times carries a pompous demeanor as traces from her previous mask, she is gradually learning to live like a human would. Though I personally think these attributes are necessary for the formation of the perfect human, they may not be comprehensive. Please let me know your thoughts about what constitutes a perfect human in the comments. I would love to hear and have further discussions, and also about Furina as a character. Thank you for listening.